Tiptoe into the next part of the service, which is our spiritual spark of the divine. We are all sparks of the divine. This particular spark, for those who have been in Bucks County a long time, may remember him from the metaphysical bookstore in New Hope called Sagittarius Books. And on the other side of the coin, he was a lawyer for many years. Still, I'm sorry. Still. So there's these interesting sides to Stan Troy. He also was a Kripalu yoga instructor for many years. He was a shiatsu and is a shiatsu and Reiki practitioner. Okay, was and is a pranic healer. And right now he is enjoying giving astrological readings. So he's going to share with us some of his astrological wisdom. And we are very, very, very grateful to have Stan Troy with us today.
So when Ken Kaplan called me and asked me to talk about astrology, I've been doing readings for about 30 years, but I've never advertised it until recently. Susan Duval asked me to do in-person readings for her. So about once a month, I've been doing readings at her house in Doylestown. But he said, well, people are interested in your story. How did a lawyer get to be an astrologer? So there's a long story and there's a short story, but I would say 2 words: curiosity and study. And later on, I'll explain how that relates to even astrology. So yes, I had the good fortune of being the founder and co-owner of Sagittarius Books in New Hope from 1981 to 1995. And because I am a Sagittarian, and that rules higher mind, philosophy, religion, and publishing, and I have a lot of Gemini in my chart, and that's someone who is very curious, interested in a lot of things, and loves information. And I have Mercury in Scorpio, which is the detective. So basically, I'm a researcher and a storyteller. I was a legal researcher out of law school. I clerked for a judge. That was my first job as a researcher. But during the time I owned this bookstore, I started taking astrology classes in Princeton. The Princeton Astrological Society at that time was very large. And I also sold books at their meetings every month. And I was able to meet the people that wrote the astrology books. And I was so impressed with the quality of these people. They were PhDs, they were scientists, they were engineers, they were physicists. And I'm going, well, there's something to this situation. So when Ken asked me to come up with a topic, I called it Humanistic Astrology for the 21st Century. So I'm going to leave my story now. Maybe I'll come back to the longer story later. But so I started to do some research online and I came up with a little description of humanistic astrology. And why does that mean something? Traditionally, astrology was predictive in nature. It was event-oriented. The kings and queens, they wanted to know when was a good time to go to war. Was the kid going to survive? You know, that's all they wanted to know, prediction. But in the 20th century, something developed that was different. And I'm going to read you something because I did this research and I wrote a little something up, so I'm going to read it. In the 20th century, especially after World War II, a new kind of astrology came into existence. Its roots can be found even before the war in the work of Dane Rudger and Mark Edmund Jones, but flourished after the war, especially in the 70s and 80s. It was a particular kind of psychological astrology that not only sought to use astrological methods for personality evaluation, but as a kind of a roadmap for individual development. Humanistic astrology focuses on the individual's personal growth, self-discovery, and psychological development. It emphasizes free will, self-awareness, the potential for positive change. Humanistic astrologers use the birth chart as a tool for self-reflection and understanding. It's person-centered rather than event-centered. Unlike more traditional forms of astrology, it does not view planetary transits as either good or bad. It doesn't deny the importance of free will and self-determination. We're concerned with how the archetypal dramas relate to greater personal growth for the individual. So learning to become more knowledgeable about your own life is the key. The astrologer exists to facilitate the process where the client becomes more aware of his or her latent talents. This kind of astrology is satisfying in many ways. It speaks to our need for self-understanding. It fits with the general idea of human potential, ideal of human potential, and by stressing growth and increased awareness. So what the reason I like doing astrology readings, as I tell people, in our culture, mostly we're focused outward on other people and what we can do for them. So how often do you get to sit down and have someone talk to you about yourself and have maybe why you're here? And what are some of your challenges that you have? And what are your personality traits? And so what happens when I do a reading? People are very happy after it because I just acknowledged who they were. You say, oh, I'm not crazy. This is the way I set myself up to be. Right? So there's two main types of readings that I do. One's a birth chart reading, and that's our blueprint for our lives. And interestingly enough, the readings I've been doing for Susan Duval attract a lot of women in their late 50s, early 60s. And I'm going, why do they want a reading at this age? And I realized, particularly for women, all their obligations are done. And all of a sudden they're saying, well, wait a second, who am I? What are my potentials? And so I get a lot out of it because people feel very acknowledged and affirmed. And that's the whole purpose of doing it. Now, there is a certain level of not necessarily prediction, but I do what's called astrological updates. And that's right around the time of a person's birthday. I'll use something called a solar return chart. And the transits are where the planets move around the chart. And this sets the trend for the coming year, for your birth year, not January 1st, but your birthday year. And what I liken it to is a play. You go to see a play, it has a name, right? But during that play, there's different scenes. And those scenes can be in the garden, they can be in the kitchen, they have different characters that come in and out. So by using something called progressions, solar return chart, and transits, you can find out the trends for the year. So why is that important? Because when people come in, they say, I've just been thinking about that. I've been wondering about that. I started to feel that was happening. So a good time to get that done is like a month before, the month of, or a month after your birthday, just to see if you're swimming upstream or you're swimming along with the river. And of course, most of the people that come to me are swimming along with the river because they also have that one word, curiosity. And when I owned that bookstore, I discovered that you could not tell when a person came in how they looked, what their background was, what their career was, what kind of car they drove. The one thing that interested them was there's something more that's going on, and I want to find out about it. And so when I had that store, I said, I wanted, it used to be called a cult. A cult was hidden knowledge, and that existed for centuries, and people had to travel all over the world, get these secret rituals and initiations. But when what they call the new age came in, it really wasn't new. It was all this information that had been kind of secret. And for whatever reason, it started to become more available to everybody, right? So when I opened this bookstore, I wanted to have people be able to tap into that on whatever level they were comfortable. So some people, it was through holistic health. For some people, it was through meditation or spiritual things. And other people, I had a great astrology section. And, I was kind of known for that because I was interested in it. So, just to understand that astrology for me is a way of affirming who we are and that we're not crazy, that we set ourselves out to be like this. And one of the things I like to tell people, I have a certain way of doing a birth chart, and I do start out with some things that are more metaphysically oriented, maybe like why I think you're here, not necessarily your personality, but some of the things underneath of it. And I've been doing this for 30 years, and I've had only 2 people that didn't relate to their charts. And I realized this one person, the one so long ago, I don't remember, but recently, the woman said to me, I said, I'm doing this. She said, well, I don't really relate to that. And she said, but I was very suppressed by my parents when I was growing up. And she was very angry about it. And I realized that the chart is your potential. And it's our choice whether we activate it or not, and to what level we activate it. And she didn't really activate her chart. And she felt very upset about it. So as I was talking, so then I decided I'm more in a counseling situation than an astrology situation. And so I did focus on her sun and moon because that's the things that most people relate to, the sun sign, the moon sign, and the rising sign is the sign on the horizon when we're born. And I said, well, you're a very creative person. What have you done that's creative? And she said, oh, I used to do ceramics and I had this job. And I said, well, go and do that again. Go back to it, get in touch with that part of yourself. And of course, there's so many other things to do. Kathy and I involved in pranic healing for the last 5 years or so. And even when you're trying to do healing with people, a good thing for her to do would have been some forgiveness exercises, something to release the past. So doing an astrology reading, I do have this piece of paper and I never met these people before. And I'm going to talk to them about, it's always a risk on my part. Am I going to tell this person that or not? But the overwhelming response is so positive and people are so grateful. Sometimes they're actually crying because I'm actually telling them something about themselves that they already knew, but they were either afraid to admit it or it was been denied in their families. So it's actually a lot of fun for me and it's a great privilege. And what I was going to say as to just lining up with how astrology works, I was saying that, because I have 3 planets in Sagittarius, that's a lot to have in one sign. And it does rule the higher mind, philosophy, religion, and publishing. And what do? Open up a bookstore, and then to have Mercury and Scorpio as I was that is a researcher. It's a sign of a detective. So people are paying me to investigate their lives. So this is great. So this is fulfilling my chart. Like I said, I started out as a legal researcher. The bigger story is that I was always interested in metaphysical things. Even when I was I became a teenager in 1960, graduated law school in 1972. So I started with Ozzie and Harriet, ended up with Jimi Hendrix. And that's an incredible cultural shift that people my age went through. It's just unbelievable, really, just unbelievable. And even though, I was really kind of left brain, I was interested in psychology, but I was always fascinated. I could see these signs, macrobiotics, yoga, meditation. And in 1972, I took a course in transcendental meditation. None of my friends were doing that. No, we were partying, And then I took a yoga class. And so one thing led to another. And after 3 years of being a lawyer, I just quit. I don't recommend that. But I did. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I had read this book called The Primal Scream by Arthur Jano. And I had some conflict with my father in my teenage years and older, and I decided to do primal therapy. And I went all the way out to Somerset, Pennsylvania. And I was there for about 6 months, and the whole place moved back to New Hope. And I figured, I guess I'm supposed to be in New Hope because I started living in Bucks County when I worked in Trenton. I worked at Legal Services in Trenton. And that's how I got to Bucks County. And I did fall in love with Bucks County. I grew up in Atlantic City, which is a resort town. I love the ocean, but I did fall in love with Bucks County. So here I am in New Hope. I have no job. When I went to the unemployment office, they never saw a lawyer at the unemployment. So it was hard to explain. So as I said to David, who's done the same, I kind of took the road less traveled. But what happened was, this is really what happened. I became a waiter and bartender in New Hope because I had grown up in a tourist town. And I knew that was something I could do anywhere in the world. And during that time, when our therapy group, we started reading these books by Jane Roberts called the Seth books. I don't know if any of you know it, but she was very, she had a very big influence on what we call New Age. She was one of the first channels since Edgar Casey, who had died around the end of World War II. So I started reading these books, and somebody said there was a woman in Washington's crossing. She was such a good friend. Sheila Reynolds from Mind Matters. And I went down and had a reading in 1978. I still remember it. And I never did anything like that in my life before, nothing. And I'm going, what is she doing here? And then by the end of the reading, I was very, very emotional. Things she had told me about a couple past lives, which did affect me the rest of my life. And we became good friends for over 40 years. Unfortunately, she passed away about a year or so ago. But she invited me over to her house to pick up this reading. At the time, she was laying down and speaking very slowly, and her business partner, Sandy Stevens, was recording it, and then they would type it up. And I didn't know at the time, but she liked lawyers, and she had a good friend who was in legal services in Doylestown, who we happened to be in the same fraternity together, believe it or not. And so I picked up that reading, and she had all these books laying around on her floor, and I was so fascinated by this person who was a channel. I'm going, how does she do that? And so I started reading about Edgar Cayce, and I started reading all his books, and I said, Sheila, we wanted to get more books. We used to have to go to New York to Samuel Weiser or to Philadelphia to Garland of Letters. And I said, people want these books. And she said, well, why don't you keep track of them? I don't want to keep track of them. And I did. And I started selling books in her office in Washington's Crossing. As soon as I put these books out, people would buy them. And I had quit being a lawyer. My parents were not happy, obviously. And so I saw this little store, and I wrote a letter to my parents, and I said, I know you're not happy. Would you be interested in financing me in this little business? And I put it in the mailbox, and as soon as I put it in, I said, oh my God, what did I do? I got to get that back. So literally, I get a call from my mother. She says, your father says everybody deserves a chance to be in business. What I didn't know was that everybody on both sides of my family had been in business for themselves at one time or another. I did not know that. So I immediately got in my car and drove down to Atlantic City, and I started that business with about $2,000 at the time in 1981. The rent was $250 a month.
Wow.
When I sold it in 1995, it was $1,250 a month rent.
Wow.
So, I took a risk, and it did pay off in that way. And I was able to immerse myself in all these things. And I thought, well, I have all these books and everything. So I'm going to do a little bit of everything because, Gemini energy likes to do a little bit of everything. So one thing led to another. As I took these courses and everything, then I said, oh, I'm going to take a risk and start to do readings for people. And I never promoted it. Just word would get around and people would ask me and I would do it. And eventually I even had the courage to charge for doing it because it did take a lot of time. Like right now, my readings are about an hour, but it takes me about 2 hours to do the research. And then I come and I satisfy the researcher part of my chart. And then I do the storytelling. So in law school, I realized I was very good at reading, writing, and talking. And that's all you need to do to be a lawyer. But it wasn't my real interest. I did that. That was a vocation for me, some way to make money. And then after I sold the bookstore, I had learned all these things. I was a holistic healer, very difficult to make a living, as everybody knows. So for the past 21 years or so, I did go back to being a lawyer, but I had a different attitude towards it. I was much more mature. I understood what was going on, and it wasn't my whole life. So they don't even know about that. I don't tell these people because they would think I'm a little crazy. So a few months ago, I know Susan Duval for many, many years, but she asked me, she said, I need an astrologer. Would you be willing to do readings at my house? And I have for the past 3 months or so. Once a month, I go there, I do 4 in-person readings. I record them and then I send them to people so that they can download them and listen to them again. We have 2 more spots open for June. If you're interested, contact Susan Duval Seminars. So I do want to leave a few time for any particular questions that people have, if they have anything about astrology or about my life. So I've done a lot of different things and I'm still here. So I'm a lot older than I look. I'm 76 years old now. And so I feel younger, but I do feel very fortunate. I don't recommend the path that I took because it's very stressful. People shouldn't quit their careers till they have something else lined up. It's not a good idea. But somehow I made it here, and then I met Dave we've been together 26 years, and she took a similar approach to life, being a hypnotherapist, reflexologist, etc. So, when you're both self-employed, it can be a little uncertain at times, but, we did take the road less traveled, and we got to here. And I've had a lot of incredible experiences and met a lot of incredible people. And so if anybody has any questions, I'll do my best to answer them about astrology.